Hey everyone, welcome to Latin Excellence in Iowa. Today you're going to find me with Jorge Guerra. He is a lecturer at the University of Iowa, and he is here to share with us his perception of being a Latino in Iowa. Jorge, thank you for being with us. Could you please tell us your pronouns?
My pronouns are he and his.
Thank you. So could you start by telling us some of your background? I know you're from Cali, and you're a transplant currently in Iowa. How did you get to Iowa? And where are you from in Cali?
hmm Wow. So it's fun having to speak about my transition from California to Iowa, which I'm sure we'll elaborate extensively in our conversation.
Hmm.
So I'm specifically from Los Angeles, California, but if you're asking about where am I from Los Angeles, because Los Angeles is a big old island of beautifulness. And for anyone who's ever been down there, I'm specifically from, as I like to call my neighborhood, South Central Los Angeles.
Hmm.
For folks who've ever been to Los Angeles, if they've been to the USC campus, that's kind of my turf, or, at least for folks who
Oh.
need familiarity. My neighborhood is also close by the 105 and 110 freeways. Again, for folks who happen to know about Los Angeles, that's my entire turf there.
Hmm.
So I was born and raised there. I my mother and my father are Guatemalan immigrants. They both immigrated to the United States in their own respective journeys, and they met in Los Angeles. And fast forward to me being born, and me being raised in this wonderful space that I will forever call my home. And with this pandemic, I miss it very dearly too, because it's
Hmm.
been wonderful to think about what that place means to me in
Hmm.
comparison to what Iowa means to me. But to
Hmm.
answer your question about what took me from California to Iowa, and interesting enough, I was recently talking to a student about this. So it's always fun sharing this because what brought me here was actually the University of Iowa. I came
Hmm.
to Iowa specifically by applying to graduate school. Um, I had finished it. I had finished up my undergraduate degree in English with an emphasis in creative writing and history. And I was looking for graduate school programs across the United States. And Iowa happened to be one of the places I was looking at. And many of you wondering why Iowa? The University of Iowa MFA creative writing program is recognized as one of the top programs in the country, and sometimes they say the world, depending who
Yeah.
you
Woo
talk to.
woo.
Right, shoot, take way to get Iowa flag with that, y'all. Um, so, as someone who was the first in the family, well, at least from a father's side, I was the first in the family to pursue BA. From my
Hmm.
mother's side, some I had other family members who had gone to college, but I was the first one to like pursue a graduate degree.
Hmm. Wow.
And I was, of course, very scared and concerned. And I had major imposter syndrome where I feel like I shouldn't be doing this. I don't want to do
Hmm.
this. I don't deserve a spot for any type of graduate program. But I had
Hmm.
wonderful support
Hmm.
pushing me forth to think about pushing me forth to think about like, well, this is the number one country in the world. Wonderful writers who've inspired me in the past, like Sandra Cisneros, went to this
Hmm.
program. You should definitely consider it. And, after winning a scholarship for my writing, I said, well, I guess I should definitely consider applying to Iowa and other major career writing programs across the United States. And by by the workings of God or whatever other spiritual beings that exist out in the world, I got accepted to the fiction program here at the
Wow.
University of Iowa, which is called the Iowa Writers Workshop. And I was, of course, completely floored. I couldn't believe that they had said yes to me and my writing and my culture and everything else that I represent with my writing. And you know, my mom wasn't very pleased by the news at first, but it's
Hmm.
fair to say that now in 2020, even though she still wants me back home, she's still very, very proud of my decisions that I've made. Um, so, I hopped on the plane and said, well, I guess I'm going to graduate school at the
Yeah.
University of Iowa in Iowa City, spend the next 2 years. And I literally thought I was just going to be here for 2 years of my graduate program because I actually arrived in Iowa City back in 2012. So this was 8 years ago.
Wow. Wow.
And I thought I was only going to be here for 2 years. But here
Yeah.
I am, 2020 pandemic time. a
Yeah.
month before an election, and I'm here still in Iowa, which I'm
Yeah.
sure if you even have questions about why I'm still here, please ask.
Well, I mean, your passion like definitely shines through the computer screen, and I think like I bet it shines into your students as well. I think you I mean you have a lot of insight to offer, and that's so exciting. I feel like um gaining such a big accomplishment, like getting into the writers program, right, at Iowa, at the graduate level. And I think, you know, that's something to like hold so dearly to your heart. And if that your mom felt that energy through you, right? Because oftentimes I feel like when in our successes, we do have to end up explaining them to our parents now, and like giving them the lowdown, like, look, this is how big of a deal it is, right? And that's kind of that's exciting to hear. I love that. So what undergrad, where did you go to undergrad? And how did you decide to study English? What was your trajectory to doing
Wow. That question. At least
that?
why English? Um, I went, oh yeah, I was trying to remember like which school did I go to? I went to California State University of Long Beach,
Mhm,
which is one of the major schools in the Cal State system out in
mhm,
the state of California.
mhm,
And for folks who would like to know this information, California State University of Long Beach, amongst many schools in the Cal State system, is actually a Hispanic Serbian institution.
oh, wow.
So it's specifically a school that, recruits, but also attracts a lot of Latino, Latinx students on campus. And I was, especially when I think about my time as an undergraduate student there compared to my graduate experience here at Iowa,
Mhm,
I was very much spoiled by the presence of so many Latinos, but also the presence of other racial and ethnic groups on campus. It also attracts a lot of the Asian American population, a lot of the Black
mhm,
African American population.
mhm,
So my undergraduate experience was very much of the sense of living in a melting pot of existence of
mhm,
so many cultures and peoples.
mhm,
So that's why I remember my time there so fondly because it really was. I mean, I already lived in a very diverse experience in my neighborhood of Los Angeles and South Central Los
yeah,
Angeles,
yeah.
and it continued in my undergraduate experience. In addition to white people who came into my experience there as well.
Yeah.
So that's where I went, and that was my experience. And to answer the question why English, which is something that I haven't really thought about as much as I should in the past. And the reason why I say that because I don't want to say I ended up as an English major on accident, but interestingly enough, when I entered,
On accident.
uh, yeah, well, something that feels that way,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
even. So my mom wants me to do all of these things, like be a doctor, a lawyer, and I'm
Yeah,
just like,
the
sorry,
basic
mom, that
ones,
ain't
yeah.
yeah, I was like, that's not for me. I don't feel it. However, when I took a course on writing a bunch of creative writing pieces in my English composition class, my instructor was, as he told me, and I'm still in contact with him today, by the way, he
Wow.
essentially mentioned that like you have such amazing imagination and writing, you really want to pursue and own this and really polish this because I think you have such amazing talent to share here on campus at Cal State Long Beach, but it could actually turn into something absolutely magnificent in the future if you choose to pursue it. And
Yeah.
I listened to him, and that's how I ended up as an English major in that regard. And I will also
Yeah.
say that the other addition that made me more excited to be an English major is that at that time I learned that I absolutely love reading. I love it so much that I still credit reading books as saving my life in my teenage years and
Mhm.
also my early years in undergrad. So I really wanted to mix in this new recognized talent to this wonderful existence that
Mhm.
made me want to live my life that I live in today.
Yeah.
So I brought in these two passions and look where it took me. It took me to the
Yeah.
number one creative writing. So something went well.
Yeah, it's always all about like recognizing your passion and seeing if it aligns with one of like your strengths or how can it align with the strength, right? I just
Right.
got like a rush and like I got kind of emotional. I mean, that's really it's really powerful stuff to hear that, especially when an instructor approaches you and like make sure that to let you know that this is something you can do. and almost like serve as a guidance and still be a connection with you to this day. And that's all it is about at the end of the day, mentorship, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm going to fast forward a little bit to your transition from Cali to Iowa. I guess like in terms of Latinx identity, what was like the biggest difference you noticed among Latinidad, and how did you feel included, excluded in Iowa?
So,
Sorry.
I mean, no, don't apologize. It's just like it's such a loaded. I mean, it's a loaded
Yeah,
question with
yeah.
so many directions to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess to start off answering this question, I'll never forget the first um, Latina that I met. And interesting enough, it was a Guatemalan immigrant. Was the
Wow.
first Latina who I met. I remember that I met her at what was called, I think it was called the Iowa City Stand Festival that existed at that time, but it no
Mm-hmm.
longer it's no longer in its existence here at the city of Iowa City.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember that I met her because she was selling a bunch of Guatemalan goods, because that's what gravitated me towards her. I'm just like, I recognize all of this. It looks very
Yeah.
Guatemalan. Let me go say hi and talk to her bien chismosa.
Yeah.
And so I was getting a taste of Latinidad from her because I was already asking her questions about, like, in her case, you as a Guatemalan and as an immigrant, why are you here? What attracted you here? Like, I'm here in Iowa for academic reasons. You
Mm-hmm.
as an immigrant selling these goods and services in this particular event, like what draws you to this event? So I myself was
Mm-hmm.
asking these questions.
You were curious.
Yeah, because I was curious, but also I wanted to know a different type of slice of history that I wasn't accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess to be more specific, as someone who's Guatemalan and knows Guatemalan history and Guatemalan immigration history, the majority of Guatemalans have gone directly to Los Angeles, and that's how I ended up
Mm-hmm.
being born and raised in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
and that's where
Yeah.
my family went. But in the context of Iowa, I'm just like, girl, why are you here? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what the hell happened?
It's so random. Yeah.
Yeah, it felt very random. But of course, once you dig into the history or you dig into like this Guatemalan immigrant's response, it brings a completely different flavor and a different type of nuance and a different
Mm-hmm.
trajectory of history as to why Latinos come to the United States, but also why one goes to California and why one goes to Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
So at least for me, I was essentially learning about, what makes Iowa attractive. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I was learning very, very quickly, not only among immigrants, but also like Latinos, Latinas, Latinx people who are born and raised here in Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
I was essentially learning about like why small towns and Iowa are so attractive to a lot of these immigrants. That to me, I still remember how shocking it was for me to hear it. And thinking about that connection makes so much sense because in the context of my family, they themselves are, or at least from my mom's side of the family, they're born and raised in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of Guatemala.
Mm-hmm.
And for many of the immigrants that I met, including from like Mexico and other areas of Latin America and the Caribbean, they're just like, we love the small town mentality that we grew up in back in our hometowns. We want to continue that tradition here in Iowa. And again, I was so fascinated by that because I'm just like,
Yeah.
wow, my mom would have totally benefited from it if she had made that direction.
And it's really interesting
Um,
because if I think of my hometown, Tepatitlán, Jalisco, is random town in Jalisco, it's very like agriculture based, small town, super hilly and like mountainous, and it's literally a parallel of Sioux City, with the less hills and the small town mentality and the rurality in an exterior. It's such an interesting like parallel, and I mean you find it exists. It's just cold.
Right, and then in many respects, especially depending which small town you go to, there are many, many, many first arrival immigrants or first arrival Latinos there who have been responsible for like essentially creating los mercados, the supermarkets owned by Latinos, the restaurants, los
Hmm.
bailes, like all of these
Hmm.
wonderful small businesses. And that was the
Hmm.
thing that I kept learning too. I'm like
Hmm.
back in Los Angeles. you just see these stores as part of your
Yeah.
community and part of your neighborhood. But here, you know, the people who are
Yeah.
establishing history here. And that
Yeah.
was to me so powerful because I'm just like, I'm meeting the person who is creating Latinidad
Yeah.
here in Iowa. And it's such an honor to meet the person who is essentially creating a history and creating a community in which their children and grandchildren, assuming that they stay in these spaces, are going to
Hmm.
benefit on the long run. It's beautiful. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it really is like we answered the why. And how yeah, there's someone that has to put up the tent, the first tent, right? And those people are here still probably, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Because as much as we say generations deep, sometimes it's only one generation, right? And that's kind of like an important thing to consider too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I know you identify as queer, and what is, I guess, your experience as a queer Latinx person in Iowa, or even in the United States in general? What has that experience been like, especially considering your Guatemalan roots?
Mm-hmm. Whew, the Guatemalan roots. Whew. um, well, for folks who are going to listen to this, the reason why I like kind of squirm a bit because when when one thinks about Guatemalan culture, or at least Guatemalan hegemonic forces, you know, homophobia is still very much in existence. And of course, because of existence, I don't want to assume that everyone's homophobic, of course, but
Hmm.
it plays a huge role in which someone like me navigates and travels as someone who is part of the queer community. So, so to answer your question, I always think about sort of, I guess you can say, the two sides that I have to deal with as being queer, which is I have to think about, you know, the heteronormativity that exists within Latino, Latinx
Hmm.
culture. And I also have to think about the LGBTQ plus culture that is predominantly white, that's predominantly male, predominantly cis, predominantly of money. Um, it's very, very rare that I see such a huge embrace of folks
Hmm.
who are specifically of even of my skin color, of
Hmm.
immigrant identity, of a lot of the
Hmm.
values that I grew up around, specifically on Guatemalan American values, or even you say Latino values.
Hmm.
Um, so I feel like I'm always kind of in this ping pong um, every time when I sit down and really think about like what does it mean for me to be, you know, a brown skinned Latino,
Hmm.
but also who's gay, but also someone who's not Mexican, specifically Guatemalan. I feel like it's always a juggling act every time when I think about how am I thinking about myself, or how am I subsisting, or how am I attempting to feel comfortable in every space that I go to. And I guess to be more specific for all the viewers who are going to listen and watch this, like as an example, when I'm with a bunch of Latinos, Latinas, Latinx people in a particular space, I'm always thinking about like, how does my Guatemalan fit in here? How does my brown skin fit in here? How does my gender expression fit in here? Because I do identify as queer and I don't fit into these masculine forms of
Hmm.
gender expressions. Of course, I think about my sexuality all the time to just be like,
Hmm.
oh, like, do people feel comfortable that I'm actually queer? Do people feel comfortable that I subscribe certain ways that
Hmm.
people might just feel like, how are you Latino, or how are you even a human being here? You know, it's,
Hmm.
you know, it gets tiresome sometimes. I hate to admit, but I also know when to just kind of turn that off as well, because there's times when, of course, I'm meeting up with people who I care and love, and I know for a fact that they accept me for
Hmm.
everything
Hmm.
that I represent and who
Hmm.
I am. So, you know, there's just times when I know that I can do it. But I will say, as someone who is in Iowa, someone who's in Iowa City, someone who is a young professional, I'm not married. I'm
Hmm.
single. I'm not attached to anyone.
Hmm.
I'm gonna say it. I own my own car. I pay my rent. I live a very independent
Okay.
life, right? It's just like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do in my
Hmm.
own sort of beautiful independence as a very magical Latino unicorn, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And when it comes, so the reason why I say this because when it comes to, let's just say, for example, if I am looking for a partnership, I have to deal with the struggles of like, what if let's just say that as an example, what if I'm the type of Latino who actually wants to meet another queer Latino as part of my partnership? Let's just say that I want to stick to that tradition. Let's just say here in Iowa, this is not a good place to go on that adventure. And it's always very unfortunate that I sometimes flat out get told that like I don't want to be with you because of your brown skin. I don't date Latinos. I don't date anyone of your race. I don't find you attractive because essentially you're not white. I've heard them all before, unfortunately, and that has created immense pain in my body in terms of processing and experiencing it. And in many ways, it definitely turns me off and thinking about even dating. And I also hear that like, oh, I don't talk to Latinos, or like, oh, I'm not interested in trying to build a communication with someone who is a brown skinned person. I feel more comfortable being with people who I recognize as part of my race and also being queer. Folks, I've heard it all.
And I guess like to extend this conversation on queerness, especially with all these intersectionalities of being queer, genderqueer, sexually queer, Latinx, and brown. When do you come out, right? Especially to your first gen Guatemalan parents, right? And I know everybody's culture and context is different, but coming out is such a big event that is focused on in the United States, and coming out is a great thing. But when is it to be done, especially when you come from these identities that could make the actual process harmful?
So
I'm so sorry. I guess it's me.
I was just gonna say you're Oprah for the hour, so you need to ask these questions.
Right.
But I will also say that I don't mind that you're asking them. It's just like, it's like, where do you begin?
Yeah.
Where do you even stop answering the question? Because it's more.
I'll ask a different question.
Answer.
I'll ask a different question. So what advice, what one piece of advice would you like to give brown queer kids that would like to come out, or when it's time for them to come out?
Okay.
That one's easier,
I think
right?
that would be, that was a little bit easier. I'll say that. So first of all, and just because I like being honest, I'm gonna be honest with y'all. So one, every time you see these, very bright messages about the importance of coming out within mainstream LGBTQ plus sort of environments and community members. First of all, consider those messages. However, you should not at all feel obligated for you to all of a sudden be like, well, because I'm receiving the messages, I guess I could come out. I do not at all agree with those type of messages because, first of all, they're very white-oriented messages that are always pushed against the queer community all the time in terms of coming out. So that's one thing I want to be completely adamant about, which goes into my second point, which is only when you feel the most comfortable, and of course, most importantly, the most safe to come out to whoever it is in your environment that you feel compelled to, or something feel comfortable to say that I am queer, that I am bi, that I am trans, that everyone has their own separate journeys with this. And to just simply say, you should all come out. Come on. Abuelita's in the closet too. Get her out. It's just like, I think it's so easy to say, to just come out or say your truth and all these other things. But as we're kind of addressing in this conversation, which I'm also super glad we're having, when it comes to folks who are of our backgrounds as being queer, being Latino, Latinx, in my case, I'm talking about immigrant background. I'm talking about also that I also come of low socioeconomic status. There's so many layers that contribute to your decision to either come out at 16, at 20, at 30, at 40. There's no really one solution of thinking about what works best for everyone. We always have to look at it from an individual standpoint, because when it comes to us specifically, who come of the intersections of being queer, or the ABCs of the LGBT, as I always say, mixed in with all the complications of being Latina, Latino, Latinx, it really comes down to, where do I feel the most comfortable? Where do I feel the most safe? Where do I feel like I can espouse and say, you know, mami, papi, abuelita, abuelito, tia, tia, primo, prima, like, this is who I am. Like, we all know when we're going to finally come out and say it. Because when it comes to these conversations, like, there's a lot of commonality when it comes to a lot of like Latinx families. But there's a lot of it that comes with so much uniqueness. And for a lot of folks, they can come out by a very beautiful, loving Latinx family. It happens.
Yeah, it happens.
There's times where you could literally be in the middle of nowhere of Iowa, and you can come out, and you know, if it doesn't go well, where are you gonna go in the middle of nowhere of Iowa compared to like bustling city of Los Angeles? It's two different ballgames. So you should always listen to that very small voice that tells you, do I feel safe? Do I feel comfortable?
Do I feel safe? Yeah.
Do I have a support system if things don't go well? Do I know anyone who can hold me for good news or bad news? Because regardless of how it goes, everybody there's gonna end up crying, you know? Or sometimes abuelita is just like, I do all this time. Let's open up that bottle, you know?
Right.
It's it really, you should really listen to yourself and your circumstances
and your instincts.
And your instincts. So that at the end of the day, those elements are what's going to save you. And then also, as I always like to tell myself when I think about that little voice in my body, that little voice is going to help you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I can be very, very adamant and clear about that.
What does being a Latinx Iowan mean?
Wow. So I lived in Iowa for from 2012 to 2020. So I've been here for 8 years. So, and the reason why I'm mentioning this time frame, because I want to be specific in ways that I will, I guess, give a phrase or give advice. I'm sure it's going to be different from someone like you, Victor, who
who's from here.
Know about. And I'm one of those arrivals that came for academic purposes and now work purposes. That's it. That kept me here. So there's so much that I can say, but I think if I want to put it into a nice little box that everyone can think of, is that please don't ever forget the first person who came to Iowa in your family. Don't ever forget why they came here in the first place, why they stayed here, why they work here, why they're responsible as to why you're born here, why you live with your family and coexist with the populations that do here in Iowa. Don't you ever forget who they are, because they made a specific type of decision as to why they landed here, even if it was an accident. They have been here to work, to build a community, to create a completely different lifestyle that involves sacrifices, that involves, for many families, hours and hours and hours working at their various forms of employment. I know that when it comes to the predominantly Latinx immigrant communities here in Iowa, many of them work in meat packing plants, and I'm sure that's a whole different conversation one can have. But as someone who learned about them here, as someone from California and came to Iowa and learned about the existence of them and how it's connected to Latinx immigrants, we never, ever want to forget the sacrifices that they're making here to be here in Iowa, to live here in Iowa. And we learn in our culture to always honor our grandparents, always honor the elder in the family, whether it's the matriarch or the patriarch. So you never want to forget as to why they decided to settle in Iowa. And depending on who you talk to, they call this place home. The same way that I'm sure many of you who are hearing, listen to this, call this home. and you don't want to forget that this is part of your journey and part of your roots. And whenever you're ready to essentially, fly out of Iowa, assuming that you fly out probably up to Minnesota, up to South Dakota, or maybe you want to be like, damn, I gotta see these gente out there in California, or have a Cuban descent. You're like, go see the Cubans out in Miami, the Puerto Ricans in Chicago and New York. Like you will see them. You eventually will. But I want you to always, always never forget that your home is Iowa, the same way that it's been a home to me for the past 8 years.
Yeah. Well, that was a very wonderful thing to hear. And Iowa is home. Thank you so much, Jorge, for joining me today in this conversation and answering all my questions. I really appreciate it. And I'm so excited for my students to listen to your wisdom and encouragement. Thank you, Jorge.
Yeah. You're welcome. And thank you so much for this time. I really appreciate this mini therapy session I had with you.
Right, mini therapy session.
Thank you, Latina Oprah, aka Christina.
Christina. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you.